Thanks, Crisaldo. We grow abroad now, where Britain's Prince Charles has used his appearance at the World Economic Forum in Davos to call for new green taxes. He outlined a 10-point plan to make the global economy more sustainable and tackle the climate emergency. Among his suggestions are that we need responsible pathways to decarbonize, as well as a polluter pays principle. The next in line to the British throne also called for investment in STEM research and development. To talk about what else is being talked about in the Swiss Alps, especially by Team SA, our reporter Liabo Setho. And Liabo, very good evening to you. I believe that you're going to speak to Sipho Pityana, somebody who I'm sure has very interesting ideas on this, experience in government, in labour and foreign affairs, but also in leading business. Now, a lot of multiple courtships for South Africa at this point when it's looking for investments.
Absolutely, Tsepiso. Good evening. You know what you've just alluded to in your intro about what Prince Charles has said with regards to the 10-point plan that he's made. This the issue of climate change and sustainable development is an issue that is quite big for the World Economic Forum here in Davos. As a matter of fact, I was boasting earlier on saying that we've had the pleasure of having what they call the Future Food Wednesday. This is what they've launched in Davos and giving the media no meat at all, opting to go for vegetarian, them saying that this is their way, their contribution to climate change and reducing carbon emissions and reducing meat consumption. But back home, we obviously have Team South Africa here in Davos, and in all their numbers, they've been going to different meetings. And yesterday, we did have the finance minister, who's also the leader of the team, who has gone out and actually reassured South Africans that it's a message of honesty that he will tell potential investors that will come and ask about the happenings in South Africa. Know that in our lead story, we're leading about South African Airways, and I will want to find out from Mr. Pityana what his thoughts are, because his counterparts actually are suggesting that SAA should actually just be sold off, as it is becoming a fiscal burden, and that the business rescue process is still underway. This and other issues have been taking place, as well as the issues about the continent and the African outlook. This is one of the sessions that Mr. Pityana has set on that he's going to chat to us about, and an interesting appointment that has been made that he'll also tell us about. Mr. Pityana, thank you so much for making time to speak to us. Firstly, let's start back at home. Lots of calls, for South African Airways to get its books in order. The minister saying that actually that the 2 billion is probably on its way to help fix SAA, but your counterparts in business saying it's time for it to be sold. What are your views?
Well, thank you very much, and good evening to you and your viewers. First of all, we supported, as business, we supported and encouraged government to follow the path of business rescue, because there are certain legal provisions that go with that. It empowers somebody with authority to take all the necessary decisions that are within the framework that of responsible execution of this. So it would be premature to pronounce on what direction should be taken, to say that there must be a business rescue process and then prejudge that by making calls, I think is out of place. So our view is that we support the step that has been taken by the board, that government supports, and we're looking forward to a business rescue process that indicates the viability of this enterprise, in what form it will be, how it will be restructured. All we ask for is that it must be a sustainable proposal, and that it must no longer be a burden on the fiscus.
Such developments make the messaging here at Davos quite tricky, don't they? What has been your experience, and what have you been asked on the corridors of Davos?
Well, some of the things that have actually been positive about the feedback is how much people appreciate the fact that across the board we appreciate and understand, and we talk openly about our challenges, and that certain things have been done, but there is a general recognition that certain things could be done a lot faster, and that's the narrative that we share. But there is no doubt that The fact that we know what needs to be done, and we've shared some of those thoughts with the investors that we interact with and some of the people that are already invested in South Africa, has given a sense of confidence that we can pull this together.
Another hot topic at the World Economic Forum this year is the issue of Africa as a whole, it being recognized, as a continent that still represents a lot of hope. You sat on a panel today which explored these issues. Please to share with us about what the thought around is from international community about what is happening in Africa and the potential that the continent holds.
Well, the debate really is about, look at Asia. Asia was the key driver of growth for the past 10 years. It contributed 50% of the world's economic growth. A large part of that was China, because China was accounted for 25% of that growth. So what does it mean for Africa? What are the parallels? The reason why that happened in Asia is because it had a development deficit. In other words, there were opportunities for investment. Africa today suffers the same deficit of development, and therefore there are prospects and opportunities. The other thing is that we talked about is the growth of the African population, which will account for 25% of the world population in 2050, and a large proportion of that would be young people. So is it going to be a youth dividend or a youth liability? The extent to which it will be a youth dividend will depend on how much we invest in young people, enable them to be actively engaged in the economy, whether in small businesses of their own or in employment, and taking advantage of the fact that this is the digital generation. And how do we enable them to develop skills that allow them to mediate technologies that are developed elsewhere, but importantly enable them to innovate new technologies and propel the continent.
I'm glad that you talk about that, because perhaps this new appointment that I've been told about, I believe you sit now on the board of the WEF Africa. Tell us about what your responsibilities will be, and given what we've spoken about, how much will you push, particularly for entrepreneurship in Africa during this time where you are sitting in this position?
Well, one of the things, by the way, it's a great honor, and it's a reflection of the confidence that the world has in South African business leadership, because I'm the only business person who serves on that. Other people that serve on that, my co-chair comes from a civil society structure. But we have participating on it heads of state and ministers, etc. So it says something about being able to do that. So one hopes that young business leaders and young professionals and across the continent, and also civil society, will use this platform to express their views on the trajectory and the journey of travel. The fact that it is led by people who are not from government says a lot. It actually creates a platform for us to engage, and yet we have government participation in it. It's a significant statement.
Allow me to probe you for just 2 minutes about the Africa Growth Platform. You had a press briefing that was co-chaired by the President of Botswana, President Masisi. I want you to just share with our viewers, what the thinking behind that forum is and how it will help small and medium enterprises.
So we recognize that a key driver to inclusive growth is actually small, medium enterprises. It's not big corporations. That's a thing of the past. Big corporations have a role to play. Africa has tended to marginalize small, medium enterprises. We're taking a view that this initiative is going to unleash participation of young people across the continent in small and medium enterprises, because when we talk about the prospect of them not being employed, we're not talking just about them being identified after queuing up for jobs to work for somebody, but how we tap their human potential and their innovative ideas of starting their own businesses and scaling those businesses up across the continent and in size and impact. And the partnership is with big corporation. As you saw, there's Alibaba there. Etiken is one of the founders. We are amongst the big supporters. There are a number of other stakeholders that are there. We're also going to be talking about what are the regulatory frameworks that enable that to happen? Because it's easier to talk about small business, it's much more difficult to execute. So ease of doing business conversations are going to be part of this. And it's good that we are part of this continental conversation, because in South Africa, as you know, the issue of employment is front and center. The president meets with all of us as stakeholders every month to talk about this. And I shared with colleagues here what that experience is like. It's not an easy journey. We have very tough, difficult conversations. But it's amazing how much it unlocks certain obstacles that are easy to move. You don't have to go to parliament and do legislation. It's things that are just easy to move if you bring them to authorities that have the will to change them. So it's those kinds of experiments. We heard about what people are doing in Botswana and in other countries. So this platform, amongst other things, will create opportunities to share the experiences in different parts of the continent.
Mr. Pityana, thank you so much. We will be catching up with you before we head back home to hear what kind of other conversations that you've had and how fruitful they've been. Thank you very much for your time, sir. Thank you. So that was Mr. Sipho Pityana sharing with us his journey here at the World Economic Forum, some of the appointments that he has been appointed to, which we congratulate him on, and of course his views on developments back home with regards to SAA and the economy at large. And with that, allow me to hand back to the studio.